Are you presently considering purchasing a property in Nigeria? Do you need clarity on the procedures or the steps required to safely or securely acquiring or purchasing a landed property in Nigeria? Hello, my name is Cynthia Tishon. I'm a legal practitioner at Lex-Praxis, and in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to buy land in Nigeria. The aim of this video is to ensure that whenever you're making any kind of property purchase, you do it with the safety and the confidence that enables you or protects you from being defrauded by fraudsters in Nigeria, right? Now, generally speaking, acquiring a property in Nigeria, requires going through several phases. But for the purpose of this video and for the purpose of time, I'm going to be compressing these phases into 4 key phases. Every property transaction that anyone undertakes in Nigeria must pass through these phases. And the phases are: number 1, you have the pre-contract phase. The second phase is the contract phase. The third one is the completion phase. And the fourth one is the post-completion phase. Now, let's head right to the pre-contract phase. Now, in the pre-contract phase, just like the word of pre, that is before the actual contract, right? So this is actually the preliminaries, or it involves going through the preliminary stage where you have actually confirmed your interest in this property. You're no more looking, you found the property and you're interested, you're willing to go full on with buying that property. Now, during this phase, this is where you are required to conduct some form of due diligence, right, with the property. What's due diligence all about? The idea behind due diligence is just to ensure that, right, you're not buying a lawsuit, you're not buying a problem or something that is going to be a challenge to you, you're not buying a spoiled investment, right? So you want to be sure that, okay, whoever it is that is posing as a seller of this property is actually the owner of that property. You also want to confirm that the property in question is actually, worth buying. In other words, is this property suitable for the purpose that I want? If you're buying it for, farming or agricultural purposes, you need to, do some kind of, examination on that property to be sure that this will actually achieve your purpose. If you're buying it for building purposes, to build the property either for commercial or residential purposes, you want to also be sure that this land that you have in mind will suit the purpose for the purchase, right? This is also where we recommend that you seek the services of a legal expert, right? A lawyer who is experienced with property transactions to help you with conducting due diligence where necessary. So once you go through this phase, this should give you the peace of mind and the confidence you need to move forward with the transaction, which brings me to the next phase, which is the actual contract stage. Now, in this phase, you have done your background checks. You are satisfied that the person you're dealing with actually has the power and the legal authority to sell that property, and that after making that transaction, you're not going to be having any problems in the future with anybody. Now, this is the phase where the actual negotiation comes in. So in this contract phase, this is where you begin to discuss with the buyer, the seller of the property rather, how much you're buying the property for, what is the payment plan, are you going to be paying in full or in installments, and what will happen if it's an installmental payment, right? You also need to be sure maybe what's going to happen with the payments. After, are you going to make the payment and then the agreement is signed? All those preliminary things you need to be sure about to secure the contract. So once this negotiation is done, are there any special terms and conditions that you feel should be included in this transaction? Maybe something like, maybe there's an observation you made with regards to the property, and you want the seller to be able to do something to satisfy your conditions for, fully acquiring that property. So all those things will be discussed and decided on this phase. Now, after this phase is completed, you go to the next phase, which is the completion stage. Now, in this completion stage, money exchanges hands, right? So the payment is made. If the agreement was that the payment was to be done in installments, the installmental payment must have been fully completed before you come to this phase, right? So no, the seller or the buyer is not owing the seller anymore. The buyer has fulfilled his or her own terms of the bargain. So in this phase, agreements are written, and usually in this kind of transaction, when you're buying a property, it is the buyer's lawyer who prepares the agreement, and the seller reviews the agreement and signs the agreement at this phase, right? Also, if there are any documents, additional documents, maybe there was a survey that was done on the property, or any other additional documentation that was done, in which the seller had as proof of ownership of that property, it will be handed over to the buyer at this phase, right? So in this completion phase, the seller completely hands over everything that the seller has as an ownership stake or ownership right when it comes to that property, right? And I would like to chip in here that it's also important, when it comes to the process of doing these transactions, that you know who you are dealing with, because depending on the kind of property you are buying, there are different regulations for who you should be dealing with or how that transaction is done. Let me give an example. So if in a situation where you're buying a property it's a kind of family property you're buying, under law, you know that you're not going to be dealing with just one person. The family head of that property must be a part of that transaction. That is just one tip. If you're buying a community property, this whoever is going to be the seller, there's a stipulated guideline, or there are legal directions for how that transaction pans out, right? And if you're dealing with just a sole owner, an individual owner of that property, is a privately owned property, there is a procedure for that. If it's a property that is owned by a company as well, there is also a procedure for that. That is why it is important to involve your lawyer at every phase of this transaction, so that they can guide you accordingly and ensure that you don't get your hands burnt during this transaction, right? Now, moving on to the final stage, which is the post-completion stage. So after money has exchanged hands, agreement has been signed, this is the stage where at this phase, most people feel, they have this tendency to be relaxed, like, okay, I've paid, I have my receipt, an agreement has been signed, so that's it. But that's a very, very big mistake most people make in Nigeria. The fact that you have paid for a property does not mean that you actually own that property in the eyes of the government or the authorities, right? You need to go through this post-completion phase. And what is this post-completion phase all about? In this post-completion phase, right, you apply for the governor's consent to actually register the property. This is where you register the property. So to register, you apply for the governor's consent to register. Once you obtain that consent, you pay the necessary application fees, registration fees, stamp duties, and every other charge associated with the application process. And finally, you get your certificate of occupancy. It is your certificate of occupancy that guarantees your complete ownership rights to that property. This is very important. Now, I'll share two important reasons why it's important to register this property after acquiring it. Number one, in the event of a dispute, right, with regards to that property, the law looks at the person who took the initial step to register that property as the owner. So let's say maybe someone is challenging your ownership right to this same property, and the person had actually paid and also taken extra steps to register that property. On face value, the law will consider the person who has registered that property as the owner of the property. You see the risk involved. So that's why it's important to take steps to do this immediately. Don't just wait, because there's also delay also attracts penalty as well. And as you delay in going through this phase, you open yourself up to a lot of challenges that you could have avoided from the onset. Now, the second important reason why it's necessary to register this transaction after buying a property is that in the event you want to resell that property, it makes it easier for your potential buyer to do their due diligence, and go ahead with the transaction. Imagine a situation where maybe this new buyer, secures the services of their lawyer to go do their due diligence, and you haven't registered the property, you haven't done anything in terms of, establishing your ownership rights with this property. It's going to be very difficult to convince a buyer to buy if the buyer knows what they are doing, or if the buyer is working on the advice of their own lawyers, right? So to avoid that problem, to make your future transaction, easy, right? Just do what needs to be done. Go register the property after making payments. Ensure that you have perfected your title. That's what we refer to as perfection of title. Ensure that everything, every documentation that has to do with ownership rights, in terms of registration with the government, with the Ministry of Lands and all the relevant agencies or authorities responsible for land property ownership in Nigeria or in the state where the property is concerned, are done and dusted, right? So there you have it. The 4 basic steps or procedures that you need to go through, every property buyer in Nigeria must go through when acquiring a property in Nigeria. I hope you found this video useful. And if you have questions, with regards anything that I just said in this video, feel free to leave them in the comment section. Or if you want to speak directly with any member of our team, you can reach out to us through any of the links in the description section of this channel. We have our WhatsApp contact information. Our website is there, www.lexpraxisng.com. You can reach out to us, or any of our social media platforms. You can send a DM and someone will respond to you. Or if you would like to work with us as well, feel free to reach out to us through those platforms or send an email, and we will be happy to attend to you. Until I come your way again, bye for now.